Yeah, so welcome everyone. And if you attended yesterday's session, then welcome back. I'm Adam Nagy, a developer advocate for the Forge platform. So we are supporting third parties building any solution on top of the Forge platform. Quick information about the training. So it's just quick sessions during the day. We are doing it throughout the week. Every day it's something different. It's self-learning with live review, which means that we'll take you through the step of the tutorial, which is on the LearnForge website. And then you will have to follow the same thing. And the end of that, every 2 hours, we'll be back. If you run into any issues during that time, you will be able to ask questions, and I will get back to you. And if the questions are interesting enough, probably I will bring it up the next time as well. Oh, there is something already in the Q&A section. Okay, I will get back to that later. So this is the main website you will have to follow. This is the http://learnforge.autodesk.io with the various tutorials. It has a few sections, and one of them is the View BIM 360 and Fusion Team models. So that's what we are doing today. And this is what we are trying to achieve. So this would be a web application which enables the user to log in with their Autodesk account and then list the hubs they have access to, the projects inside those hubs, the folders, files, their versions, etc. And then being able to visualize that inside the Forge viewer. So the times for today, just like yesterday, it's every 2 hours, something happening. The very first section, which is what we are doing now, this is the same like we did yesterday. But if you followed yesterday's session, then you should rename your folders for the project because it will be called the same. And the other main difference is that now you really have to make sure that the callback URL is correct, because for third-legged authentication, that will be taken, that will be actually used. So we are in the intro and setup section now. In 2 hours time, it will be create server and authentication basics. Then 2 hours later, list hubs, projects, and user info. And finally, the show model on the viewer when we are going to implement the client-side code, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in order to communicate with the server. And how you can ask questions. At the moment, you can raise your hands as well, but when I'm away, the best thing is if you use the Q&A button, so that you can just type in your question and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So let's get started with the intro. Sorry, just there's another Q&A. Let's see if it's something different. I'll get back to that later. Okay, so intro and setup. The main thing you have to do is create a Forge account. So basically, I think most of you, if you are using Autodesk products, have an Autodesk account already. So with that Autodesk account, you can just go on forge.autodesk.com and then log in. And once you did that, you can start your trial of Forge and can create also an app on the /my apps part of the website. I'll go there in a second, so don't worry about it. And you need to use an account. One way to do that is you can just go on a360.autodesk.com. A360 itself got retired, so now we just have Fusion Team or BIM 360 Docs. But when you go on this website, when you say you want to try it out, it will actually offer you these two options, and then you can choose. So, and if you choose BIM 360, it will take you to this website, which is the second in the list here. If you have a BIM 360 account, then in order to enable the application's access to your BIM 360 account, you will also need to enable it. So there's an article on forge.autodesk.com tutorials which tells you what exactly you have to do inside the BIM 360 interface. So you need to be an admin in order to do that. And this session is the .NET Core session. My colleague is doing the Node.js one. And so we need Visual Studio 2019 in order to implement our code. And you can simply use the community version of it if you don't have one already. And this is freely available if you're just playing around with code. So that's what you can use. And when installing it, just make sure these two sections are definitely selected, the ASP.NET and web development and the .NET desktop development. Yep, so this is the website that you will have to be following today as well, just like yesterday. So learnforge.autodesk.io. And the first thing you'll have to go through is home before you start coding, tools, OAuth. So it just talks about the tutorials in the home section and then before you start coding. So this takes you through the steps of creating your Forge account. So if I click on, if I'm already on forge.autodesk.com, I can just click sign in, and then using my Autodesk account, I can just sign in, and if you have this account already, it will automatically take you to my apps. So you can see what apps you've created so far. So I already created one for the training. And this is the information you will have to provide when you're creating the app. So by default, it will select all these various APIs. It comes up as a choice because it's a kind of security feature as well. So you can limit what kind of access your app will have, whether it will only be able to use BIM 360 APIs or data management API or webhooks or whatever it is. But you can just select or leave all of these selected when you're creating the app. That's fine. Well, I might as well actually show it to you. So I can just go back here. You see, so when you say you want to create an app, then all these will be offered by default. So you can just leave them selected and provide some information. And that's the main thing. So for the callback URL, you have to be precise because otherwise your sample code won't be working. So this one takes you through those steps. In the create an app section under active subscription, you will find this URL that you need to use. So localhost port 3000 API Forge callback or auth. So make sure you use this. And for your website, it's optional if you want to add something or not, and then just click create your app. And the main thing is that as a result of this, you will get your client ID and client secret that you will need to use inside your application in order to take advantage of the Forge services. So now we'll get to the tools, what you need to install. So again, this is the Visual Studio Community 2019 version that you would need to install. We have the link to the download right there. The first download is really small because it just kicks off the downloading of the various components which are needed. And as part of the download, it will offer you, what kind of parts of this Visual Studio environment you need. So again, definitely select ASP.NET and web development and .NET desktop development. And that's really it. So good luck with these parts, and I will be back in less than 2 hours time. And in the meantime, again, you can just submit questions. So here it is on the slide as well, so you can see it. And so you can get started with this part. Yep, so welcome back. Hopefully you managed to complete this task. So creating all the various accounts and also install the software, in this case Visual Studio 2019. So again, just to recap, you needed to create your Forge account and create an app that will provide you with the client ID and client secret that you will need to use. ID installed and running, which is Visual Studio. If you're using BIM 360, then you would need to have a BIM 360 account admin. You would need to be an admin of the BIM 360 account in order to enable your application to work with it. And this is what your app looks like. So just enable all the various components, that's no problem. You will find here the client ID, client secret. Make sure the callback URL is correct. So it's HTTP and not HTTPS. And here are the programs we needed to install. And again, if you are using BIM 360, you have to be an admin, and then you would find these settings available for you. So you would have a settings tab, custom integrations, and that's where you can add your add-in. Let's see. So this, okay. So let's move forward. So now we have to create a server for .NET Core, find new project, ASP.NET Core. I'm going to go through these steps. I'm just reading them from the slides first. So we just have to set up environment variables, start up CS file, and then create the first controller, which will be providing the endpoints for the authentication. And just, I mentioned it, so if you attended the session yesterday and you created the sample, then since each day we are using the same project name, the best thing is if you modify it, because previously as well, it happened that people attended the session on Monday and they had the project and they kept the solution there and they just kept adding files to it, and it just became a mess because the authentication mechanism in sample today is different from yesterday. Yesterday it was just a simple two-legged. Today it will be a three-legged authentication, and they are not compatible. So please do make sure you're either deleting the project from yesterday or just renaming the folder, because you have to follow the same naming convention, to keep things simple. So now we can open up Visual Studio 2019 and then can create a new project. And then we can just simply follow whatever is said on the Learn Forge material. So yesterday it was view your models. Today it's view BIM 360 and Fusion models. So you've been through the account creation already. Now we can create the server, select .NET Core. And these are the steps you have to go through. Again, today as well, the project will be named exactly the same. So that's what we have to follow. Again, C# for web development. It will be an ASP.NET Core web application. So just select that. Click Next. Now we can name it Forge Sample. The location could be whatever you want it to be, that's fine. Also, it's better to keep this ticked place, solution, and project in the same directory, because this defines the folder structure of the project. So let's just stick with that in case the project is expecting this is this way. Also, you can untick the configure for HTTPS because we are just doing local testing just simply with HTTP. That's good enough. And it will be ASP.NET Core 3.1. So when you look at the GIF, which is showing how you create the project, when we created it back then, the 3.1 wasn't even available. So that's why you will see it here when it's creating the project, it will offer the 3.0. But since then the 3.1 was added, and that's what we are going to use. So we're all done. We can create a project. Yeah, we can continue with the next steps. So just like yesterday, if you attended the session, there are a few things we have to add. So there will be the ASP.NET Core URLs. You can just copy paste these things. And where you find these settings is if you right click on the project inside the Solution Explorer. I have to move one of these out of the way. And there will be properties. And then under the debug section of the project. And then you will see an environment variable section with an add button. This is what you can click. And then we can start copy pasting in the values that we need. Now, the client ID and client secret, I need to go back into my app. So yeah, so this was the training app that I created. You can just copy the client ID. Now add the client secret. And my secret is again here. You can just double click on your client secret in the on the Forge website, and then paste it in here. And now just the Forge callback URL is left. And this is important in today's sample because again, we are using three-legged authentication. So this is the URL that the Forge website will redirect you to. So I think that should be all okay. I can just click Save All to make sure I don't lose any of these changes. And just like yesterday, I mean, the order of things on the tutorials website might not be the best because it shows the GIF, how you create the project, and some people might miss that they also need to add these NuGet projects listed just before this GIF. So one of them is the Autodesk Forge. And in order to do that, you can just right click on the project in the Solution Explorer, and then there's the Manage NuGet Packages. And you can click on Browse to find it. You can just simply copy it from here as well if you want to. And you can just use the latest version, latest table 1.7, that's fine. Click Install, click OK on the pop-up dialog. And the next one, you only need these two packages to be added. So again, we go back to the browse, it's going to find it for us. You can just select it, go with the latest stable version, click OK on the pop-up dialog, and this time we also have to accept a license. So let's do that. And it's still doing something, but we can just continue. So we added all these. We have to make sure that these settings are correct as well. So app URL. So we have to change it to 3000 as well, just like it was set here in one of the ASP.NET Core underscore URLs, same thing. So in all our samples, we tend to stick to this port 3000. So the best thing is if you get used to this number, because this is what we always use. And you can just leave this enable SSL unticked. Good, and now we can start adding code. So the first thing will be, I mean, the startup CS is already in the project, but we need to modify it. So either you can just select it and copy it, or just click on this button that should be popping up for you as well on the website. So copy to clipboard, and then you can go into startup CS and place it just under the last using statement. Good. And then we are going to replace the content of the startup class. So make sure you're not deleting the whole class. Don't select the whole class. We are just selecting the content of the class. So inside the class, after the brackets, you just select everything inside the class and then replace it with the code which is coming from the website. So as you can see, it just adds some support for Newton sub-JSON, sets up the file server mechanism for the website and things like that. So that part is done. We can go to the next section, which is authorize. So we have to add one more file. And just like yesterday, we have to create a controllers folder that will be containing the various controllers that we are creating. So you can just right click on the project and say add new folder and then name it controllers. And this is the file we are going to create. It's called OAuth controller. So you can just right click on the controllers folder and say new item. And you can select the class and then just rename it to this specific thing, OAuth controller CS. In this specific case, we can just replace the whole content of this file. So copy to clipboard. And again, just like yesterday, at the moment, we are focusing on the server-side code. In the very last step, we are adding the client-side code. And I have a picture for it that I was using yesterday as well. Let's see if I can find it. It's here. Yeah, so there are three parts to our web application. Pretty much all our web application is always structured this way. So there's, of course, Forge that we want to use. There will be our own server, which will actually interact directly with Forge. And there's also the client-side code, which will be used inside the browser that has the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. But those are downloaded, onto the client side. And then the JavaScript code will just simply call the various endpoints of our server-side code. And then in return, our server-side code will reach out to Forge, do whatever it needs to, and then report back to the client-side code. So as you can see here as well, what these controller classes are doing is they are implementing endpoints or exposing endpoints on the server side. So from the JavaScript code, we will be able to send a simple HTTP request to our own server, to these various endpoints, in order to, for example, to sign out or get the authentication URL where we need to redirect the user to, so that the Autodesk website will pop up where the user can log in and then authorize our application's access. And then once that was done, it will redirect to the callback URL that we provided for the app. And when that happens, we will catch it here, and then we can turn it into an access token. And that's how three-legged authentication goes. You redirect the user to the login page, and when the user logged in and authorized their application's access to their data, then this website will redirect back to the URL that we provided for our app. And then you get there a kind of token or code, which you can then turn into an access token. And then from then onwards, you can use that access token in order to call the various Forge APIs. And that's pretty much it for this second section. So we just needed to modify the startup CS file and created our first controller, which will handle the three-legged authentication for us. Yeah, so welcome back. This is the third section today. So hopefully you managed to finish the previous part, which is creating a server and doing the authentication. In this case, it's a three-legged authentication. So like you can just, let's recap on it before starting with the list projects and user info. So hopefully you created a project with the server setup. So that was the startup.cs, and then adding the controller for the authentication part. Haven't seen any question on this section. Anyway, so let's just go on. If you have any questions, you can post it in the Q&A panel. So in this part, we are going to implement the server-side code, which will retrieve all the hubs that the given user has access to, and list all the hubs, projects, folders, files, and the versions for the files, and also retrieve the user-specific info, name of the user, and the picture if available. So we'll have a user controller, or we'll have a controller for this, the data management controller, which is using the data management API, and the user controller using user-specific APIs. And before I get on with that, I just wanted to point out, just like yesterday, but in case you didn't attend the session yesterday, that was a good question about why we have an internal token and a public token. And is this sample following that sort of convention as well? So again, here is the picture I usually show. So these are the three parts again. So we have something called scopes, which can specify that when you're creating an access token, what sort of functionalities it will provide, whether it will provide like read access, being able to list the available buckets or list the hubs available for the user, downloading files and so on, or whether it's just for viewing the model inside the browser. So, and what we usually do is that we keep the token, which has all this functionality available on the server side. Don't pass it down to the user, because imagine if the user's machine is somehow compromised, someone can listen to the traffic, for example, then they can have access to that they can retrieve that access token, and using that access token they could have full access to the user's account, which is not good. So instead we are creating what we call the private access token, in which case, or for which the only functionality available will be just viewing the specific models from the user's account directly inside the Forge viewer. So that's all it can do. And that's the only token we are passing down to the user. And then the users, I mean, on the client side part, the JavaScript code, which is also creating the viewer, will be using that access token. And then in return, the viewer will be able to use that to retrieve the SVF content, that's the viewer format, from our servers. So that's why we have it there. And another comment was that this sample is not using the model derivative API. Well, I guess it's just to keep things simple. And unlike yesterday, when you're uploading files into the bucket, you definitely have to explicitly kick off the translation of the file into the SVF format in order for you to show the model inside the Forge viewer. But in case of the today's sample, when we are just retrieving content from BIM 360 docs or Fusion team, how people tend to use those accounts is that they upload the file, probably click on the file as well, which in return will kick off the translation anyway. So once the user viewed the file on, for example, the Forge or the Fusion team website, then it's translated already to the viewable format, in which case we can just use it from our application. We don't have to use the model derivative API in order to translate it. Okay, so that was about the previous section. Now let's get on with the coding. So if you go back to the Learn Forge Autodesk website, so this is the section we need to look at. It's still BIM 360 Fusion models, and then now we are on the list hubs and projects part. So again, it's going to use the data management API. You can see how the API and the internal services are structured. So the object storage service, that's what we used in yesterday's sample. So these are just simply buckets, and you cannot even structure the data inside those buckets. So you cannot have a bucket inside the bucket. and thereby creating a kind of folder structure. Inside the buckets, it's always just a flat structure. So on top of that, we have the data service, which enables you to, structure your data into items, folders, and versions. And on top of that, we also have the project service, which will provide the hubs and projects. So this is all available through the data management API, and that's what we are going to use. So we can just click on the .NET Core link here to see what we need to implement. So as you can see, we just need to add a couple of more controllers. So the first one will be the data management controller. So let's just go back to the code. You can right click on the controllers and say add new item, and then just rename it. There seems to be, I just quickly check. Can we show the translated the models from this to yeah, so BIM 360 Docs also supports two-legged access. So it's like a server to server side access, but so you would be able to access the models, I'm quite sure, using just two-legged authentication if it's enabled for BIM 360. But in case of Fusion Team, you always have to go through the three-legged authentication. That's the only way to access files from there. That was the question, so I'm just answering that. Okay, so get back to the code. We just created this file, the data management controller CS, and now we can copy the content. So you can just replace the whole file with this. So there seems to be some errors. I think we are just adding the relevant code later. So, and then there's supposed to be another one. So it is supposed to be going inside the same data management controller class. To complete it, also copy the following. So let's just copy this section as well. So basically this part has been just put into multiple sections. So it's supposed to be also going into the data management controller class. So make sure you're clicking at the right place. Yeah, so here is the implementation of the JS3 node. And as always, these controllers, what they do is they provide an endpoint on the server side that your client side code will be able to call. So in this case, on the client side, we'll have a JavaScript controller, which is called the JS3 component that we will be using. And this is going to call this endpoint on the server, API Forge Data Management. And when it calls it with this hash symbol, it means we want to get access to all the hubs. So as you can see, we are going to retrieve all the hubs that the given user has access to. And then recursively, it will just go down, the hubs, projects, folders, files, versions, and the rest. And then in return, it will keep calling the server again and again with more information. So when it's asking for the contents of the hubs, then we are going to call the get projects async, and then we just pass it back to the client. And then this way you can enumerate all the contents that the user has access to and then show it inside the tree controller. So this is what's happening here. And then we need the user information. We'll create another controller for that as well. So you can just click on user information and then select the .NET Core. And this file will be called user controller.cs. So you can go back here, right click on controllers, add new item, class, and then just rename it. Now we can go back and copy the whole code and then just replace the content inside the file. And as you can see, this controller only exposes a single endpoint, which is about the profile related information. So that should be the user's first name, last name, and also the picture. And this will be passed back to the client, and then based on that, we can show it inside on the web page inside the user interface. And I think that's it for this section. There will be only one more remaining in about, again, less than 2 hours time, when we are going to implement the client-side code, which will be then calling all these server-side endpoints in order to provide the functionality of this app. So that's it for this section. Now it's your turn to implement all this. And then again, if you have any questions, just use the Q&A panel and ask away. Yeah, so we arrived at the last section for today. Let's get back to the slide. So hopefully you finished the list projects and files, and then the user info. Now we'll get on with the client-side code. So that's what we are going through. Again, to recap, so you must have added the list projects code and user info code. And again, if you have any questions, just put it in the Q&A panel. So on the client-side code, what we need the HTML file, which, we'll create the actual web page, then CSS to define the look of the page, and then 2 JavaScript files, one of them for the viewer itself, and the other one is forestry.js that will contain the JS tree control that will keep asking our server-side code to provide all the hubs, projects that the user have access to. So previously, we only focused on the server-side code, implementing the various endpoints, which in return will call the Forge APIs. And now we are adding the client-side code, again, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. So we can just go on the Learn Forge website. And this is the last part, so show on viewer. Again, just click on .NET Core, and this is what we need to add. It's just like, yesterday, first of all, we need to add the www root. We can already do these steps now here. Where are we? So you can right click on the project and say add new folder, www root. And as you add it, straight away, the icon should change. If it didn't change, then maybe you have a typo in the name that you put there. So make sure that the icon changed accordingly. And now we can start adding files and folders. Let's just add one folder for the CSS. And again, add folder for the JavaScript files as well. And I think we can just follow the rest. Now we will start adding the files here. So first one is the index.html. Make sure it will be with a small I and not an uppercase one in the file name. So you can just right click on the www root and say add new item. And then this should be the HTML page. It could be really anything, but might as well follow. Yeah, and then just name it index.html. And we can just copy the whole code. Yeah, so just like yesterday, there are a couple of controls coming from outside, from somewhere else. For example, one is related to the JS tree component that we will be using, some Twitter related bootstrap, which helps us with the customization of the look and feel of the website. And then here are a couple of references. One is for the style sheet of the viewer, and the other one is the actual script. So the viewer3d.min.js file. And then the rest, these 3 links are related to the files that we are going to add. So one is the main.css we are going to add in a second, and then the 2 JavaScript files that we are going to use. And inside the HTML file, you can see, the various components that we added, how we organized the components, divs, and the rest for the user interface. So next part is the main.css. Again, it's a small letter M, not capital. So we can just go right click on the CSS folder and say new item. And change it to main.css. Again, let's just copy the whole thing. Done, and now comes the two JavaScript files that we are going to add under the JS folder. In this case, it is capital F and capital T for the file name. So right click on the JS folder and click add new item, JavaScript file, boom. Again, just copy the content and paste it in here. So as you can see, in the first step, we are going to get back the token so that we will be able to pass it to the viewer when we are, displaying the model in it on the website. And with this call, we are asking the server-side code to tell us where exactly we need to redirect the user so that they will be able to log in on the Autodesk website with their Autodesk account and passwords, and then authorize our application to access their data. And then this function about prepare user hubs tree. So this is where we are using, as you can see, the JS3 component. And we just have to specify the endpoint that it will keep calling in order to iterate through all the contents that are available to the user. So for the root, it's just going to pass the server a hash sign, a hash symbol. So we know that we need to pass back the list of hubs the user have access to. And then for each hub, as the user clicks on them in the user interface, this component is going to reach out to the exact same endpoint, again, the API Forge data management. And it tells, okay, so what are the projects inside this hub? We return the projects, then the user clicks on a project. It's going to call, again, this same endpoint on our server-side code to retrieve the contents in the project and so forth until we get right down to the version. And when the user selects a specific version of a given file, that's when we are going to show that and show that inside the viewer. So this is what this part is doing here. And then we have the show user code, which is calling the endpoint from the user controller.cs file. So this will retrieve the profile related information, the name of the user and the profile picture if they have one, so that we can put it into the user interface. And then we still have one more file to add, which is the forge viewer.js. So again, just right click on the JS folder and say new item, JavaScript file, rename it to forge viewer.js. And just copy the content from here. And as you can see, all it does is tells the viewer which file to load and then what model to load from it. And then it's calling the initializer part of the viewer with the viewer.start. We are specifying the document ID that you want to load. And so we are trying to retrieve a specific viewable ID from there if it was provided. Otherwise, we are just fetching the default geometry. As I said, in case of Revit model, it tends to be the main 3D model. In case of DWG files, it tends to be one of the 2D sheets, even if you have a 3D geometry inside the DWG file. And then we also provide a function which will then retrieve the currently active access token for the viewer so that it can use it in order to request the SVF files from the Forge server and then display the model in the viewer. So that's really it. So we can give it a try. Just click on save everything, save all. Let's try to compile it. You can go with Shift Control B, or just right click on the project itself and say build. Both of them should be fine. So it built successfully. I just quickly double check the settings I have. So right click on the project, say properties, debug. Interesting. So it seems like for some reason I did not actually save these, the project settings, but I can see I have all the necessary parts. I have the Forge client secret, client ID, ASP.NET, and then there should be the Forge callback URL. Yeah, it all seems to, and I missed this one. So the app URL, I forgot to set it. So this should be 3000. And now make sure I save everything. So click save everything. And let's just rebuild just to be on the safe side. So build again. And now let's give it a try. So I have a Fusion Team account and hopefully I will be able to log into it. So when I click sign in, you can see we are on localhost 3000, port 3000 at the moment. When I click sign in, it should redirect us to the Autodesk website. You will see the URL changing. You see all accounts, autodesk.com, da, 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 da. So I can just log in with my account. And now it's asking us to approve these applications access to our data. So to write data, manage my data, view my data, and also view your viewables. So this is for being able to display my models inside the viewer. So I click allow. And as you can see, I don't actually have a picture for this account. And I can iterate through these two hubs that I have access to. I can go down the demo project. Let's see the sports car. I can see I have a single version for this given file. So I can just click on it. And as you can see, it started loading the model and there it is. So it's all working fine. So hopefully you managed to get to this point as well. If you ran into anything, then let me know in the Q&A panel. Otherwise, we can get back to the presentation part. So now you have to implement this part. And again, so let me know if you have any questions related to this. Yep, so I hope everyone now managed to finish the task for today. I did not get any questions on the Q&A panel, so I hope it all went fine. So just to recap, we added the client-side components, the index HTML, main CSS file, Forge Viewer.js, Forge 3.js. And so that's done for today. And then there will be 3 more sessions. So on Wednesday, there will be extending the viewer. On Thursday, we'll have information about dashboards. How could you create them on your website? And on Friday, modify models with design automation. And even in the meantime, I will be offline now, but in the meantime as well, you can ask questions on Stack Overflow or contact us directly through the Get Help website on the Forge website. These are the main tags that you should be using if you are asking something on Stack Overflow. So Autodesk Forge, Autodesk Viewer, or Autodesk Data Management, if it's relevant to today's topic. And so that's it for today. Thanks very much for joining. And then I'm going to do the session on Friday. So see you on Friday. Bye.